every week from Washington, D.C. Good morning, Congressman Keating. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Chris.
How are things in D.C. today?
Well, I'm back home. We finished up yesterday with the omnibus budget. So I came home last night and I was actually in the town of Pembroke this morning speaking to a group, a chamber group, and then back to the Cape, anxious to talk to you as we do weekly.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman. No, and we really appreciate it. I know the listeners really appreciate it. So I have a couple of things I want to ask you, but we did have a caller who wanted to ask you a question, wanted me to ask you a question, and I'm going to make it as short as possible. Talking about trade in China, this gentleman taught in a school in China for 8 years. I believe he taught English over there in China. And he had the impression from living there that the Chinese government and the leadership there condones cheating in the area of stealing technology, violating patents, things of this nature. And he was concerned with that nothing had been done about it, and now he sees something being done about it in the form of tariffs, and he wanted your opinion on that.
Well, the first part of that, he's absolutely right. There's no question they are really stealing intellectual property at every opportunity that they can get. They're actually embedding themselves. I'll go further than your caller. They're embedding themselves in academic institutions. They're actually seeking out professors who are involved in projects and, probably private-public partnerships with the schools where they're trying to embed students in with those particular teachers so they can get inside information that they're not entitled to on research and development. So they're doing these things at that level. They're also requiring countries more and more to give up those secrets, give up those patents, give up that intellectual property if they're going to do business, in terms of development and sales and marketing of a product. So they're doing this at every level. Now, I'll have a different approach in terms of what I think is more effective, because I'm concerned about not that we're doing something regarding China and the way they're acting in terms of the international market, but I think it should be refined in terms of its approach. And I also think this: the most effective thing we can do to deal with China and to help with Russia at the same time, and to help jobs back here at home, it's a win-win-win in that category, is to have a free trade agreement with the European Union.
Okay.
If you took the European Union, our closest and most voluminous trade partner in the United States together, they're about a half the world's GDP.
Wow.
But we share the same values. We do not cheat on intellectual property. We make sure people are treated well. We make sure they're working in safe environments. We're making sure children aren't working. We're making sure that if a business pollutes, they're responsible for it. All those things that we share, we should join together, and together we have more strength dealing with China, because we can play this game. It's almost like a race to the bottom. It's a lose-lose situation where we strike some tariffs on them. They're going to come right back at us. And so just locally in our area, I talked to someone in the business, he has a small business. He sells boat stands that have steel and aluminum. The effect on him with an American business would be significant. We're in the retaliation side. The EU was already putting a list out of prospective retaliatory tariffs that include cranberries, which is a huge industry in my district. And I was on in contact directly with the ambassador from the EU, as well as the French ambassador, the German ambassador, to try and deal with that issue, which now the clock is ticking on 90 days, and whether or not we're going to go in that direction. So trade prompts long answers like this, so I apologize.
No, it's enjoyable. We're speaking with Congressman Keating.
But it's also, I agree on the problem. I would take a different tack on the way we go after the Chinese.
We're speaking with Congressman Keating, who's our congressman here on the South Coast. So last week, we were talking about, because, of course, for those people who don't realize, Congressman Keating's specialty is trade and foreign affairs. That's the committees he serves on in Congress. Congressman, last week we happened to be talking about John Bolton, and now he's the designee to be the new national security advisor. What are your thoughts as a continuation of last week's program?
Well, I'm just I want to see what direction this is going to take. There's a concern that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, for instance, are really they were against the Iran agreement. Where that's going to go with the president, because other members of his staff, Tillerson, shared a different view. It's interesting. I met 2 days ago in a group of just about 15 people. There's a security group that we have in D.C., and I met with John Mattis, Secretary Mattis, General Mattis, who I believe is one of the smartest people, not only on, well, it's all overlaps. He's one of the smartest in terms of warfare. He's one of the smartest in terms of our national security. And he also is very smart on economic affairs. And in a question I had with him dealing with the issue of our trade policy, I said, this really isn't in your lane, General, but I'm concerned. The current administration's approach in Europe is we're going to have trade agreements country to country. That's going to be divisive. That's going to give Putin just what he wants, us breaking up that coalition we have that we use in defense, our security, going after terrorists, and economically, using it, the NATO group, using it against us. And he said, Congressman, he said, that's right in my lane. Those are the security issues we're concerned about. So, the Mattis approach with North Korea, for instance, has been one in that meeting where he said, I don't know where this bloody nose, theory comes from. It never came from me. He said, that's not what I advocate. I advocate diplomacy. And so, we've got recent statements from John Bolton where he's advocating that kind of military approach is the only thing that'll work. So I am going to be very interested, hopefully not concerned, but interested that whether the Mattis view and the Bolton view can coalesce.
Well, Congressman, we talked about this last week, but now that he is in the position, because it doesn't require Senate approval, as I understand, so he will have that job, correct?
That's right.
All right. So you talked last week about fentanyl, which is a very big deal to you, as it is to all of us here. In China, you brought that up last week, and I think I mentioned to you that I had an interview with Bolton 2 years ago now, approaching 2 years ago, in Boston, where he talked about, or I asked about China and fentanyl, and I'm wondering if maybe that's somewhere an area where you folks can get together here, and what we do about China and the fact that they're manufacturing and encouraging that importation to the country.
Well, I think the president has addressed that with China strongly.
Okay.
I did learn from what we spoke about last week on the enforcement side, even how difficult this could be for China. There are some legitimate businesses by day, and then they shift by night to producing fentanyl. So even China, in cooperation, can have its limitations. But clearly, we need the most cooperation we can get on something that's killing so many of our people. But it's going to be hard. That's what I learned from my discussion with our Homeland Security chief investigator in Hong Kong that deals with these issues in China.
Well, we're speaking with Congressman Keating. And by the way, folks, if you're just tuning in and you've missed this, like we do every week, the Congressman allows us to put it up on YouTube, so you can go back and watch the interview in its entirety. Congressman, it's been a little bit out of the news, I think. Things happen so fast. But any updates on the Jared Kushner situation?
It's interesting, Chris. That's gotten very quiet, hasn't it?
Yes, extremely quiet.
And that's not always a good thing.
No, sir, it isn't. No.
There have been more reports because one thing you'll say about Muller, he keeps things pretty quiet. The things he's working on aren't leaking out. The leaks are coming elsewhere. But some of the things that have leaked out in terms of what potentially they're looking at, his business dealings keep coming back to the forefront every time. And we haven't heard much since we last discussed it. But I don't think that means there's nothing happening. I think they're still investigating many of those things to see if, in particular, while he was given the top security clearance, the highest level of clearance that our country gives, whether he was having cross conversations about his own economic situation and getting loans from those countries. we did have the report that came out from the Saudi prince, who basically said he can play Jared Kushner any way he wants after having an extended meeting that went on to the early morning hours with him. So something to be careful of, something that they've taken action on. General Kelly has taken his security level clearance away. But the issue remains what was going on, and I think that's going to be investigated most likely by Bob Muller.
We're speaking with Congressman Keating, who's back in his district down the Cape. I just want to circle back, Congressman, because you touched on it briefly, but on the cranberries, which are so important to this area, all across Massachusetts, and the fact that they may be targeted by other countries in a retaliatory way. What are your plans on that? What is there anything that you folks can do? And what have you been doing?
Well, first of all, in terms of the list that was created by the European Union of possible trade targets, look, they put Kentucky bourbon and they put cranberries in.
Right.
The reason they did that was Kentucky bourbon. That's Mitch McConnell's specific trade. Mitch McConnell being the head of the Senate, and cranberries. That's Paul Ryan's, along with ours, the top two cranberry producers in Wisconsin. Right. So they were included to send a message that way. I did talk to the ambassador to the European Union that's at the head of all this, David O'Sullivan. As we'll recall, an Irishman.
Yes. But
he's the head of the European Union right now, and I talked to him about my concern. I said, I know why you targeted cranberries in that respect. Let's continue a dialogue, please, as to what the effect can be. So I opened up a dialogue with them, urging them not to include that as any retaliation. Since then, and they assured me nothing would happen in 90 days because the World Trade Organization agreement says that there's no reaction for 90 days, and the European Union was going to abide by that. In the interim, the administration has said, we're exempting Europe for 90 days, so the difference is negligible, but the clock's ticking on the 90 days. I hope that for many reasons, the bigger reason being we should be going in the opposite direction with Europe. We should be having free trade with Europe instead of sitting there either singling out each country or having this fight on tariffs. That is not who the fight is with. Those are our allies. And it's Putin's greatest dream that we're dividing ourselves on trade and fighting like this. Nothing gets better. And sometime in the future, I can tell you conversations I've had with Russian ambassador and other people, how centered they are on this. But take my word for it at this juncture, that's what makes Russia happy. We should be banding together in the other direction. So that's what I talked about in that regard. Now, China would be interested in cranberries because they're looking at agriculture. The biggest exports we have are agriculture. And to China and other countries, that would be devastating to those parts of our economy. So you get into these kind of fights if you're not strategic and dealing from the strongest hand in terms of tariffs, and everyone ends up losing. Even the guy that is in my district that's talking to me, this is really going to hurt my business. I do boat stands that require steel and aluminum, the cranberry industry, even the tariffs we imposed on Canada that really it's a net loss for us. But just this week, because of the lumber tariffs that we put on against, again, Canada, cedar in my district, and you can look at my district and look at a lot of the areas, home building and everything in the Cape, the cedar shingles and everything that are there.
Sure.
That went up 20.8%, and so the markup already occurred. So when you're building a house, already the lumber tariff has resulted in 20% more if you're building a house, and we're not getting anything out of that. In fact, there's a lot of U.S. harvested lumber that goes to Canada. They process that, but that U.S. harvested lumber gets caught in a tariff, our own industry. So we're going to be careful about this because people will be paying out of pocket these expenses. And And that's not great for our economy either, because when people are paying more for whether they're going to Walmart or any kind of store, if they're paying that much more, there's less spending out in the market. It's going to hurt our economy. So we have to deal with China. We have to deal with, but let's do it in, I think, a stronger, more intelligent manner.
We're speaking with Congressman Keating, who's back here in our listening audience today from Washington. You know, Congressman, just to circle back about what it is like to be a congressman here, because I don't know that people realize that. So you voted last night, then you flew home last night, then this morning you were up in Pembroke giving a speech. What does the rest of the weekend entail? I hope you get a little time to enjoy yourself.
Well, we're going to have events, you know, some of the gun safety issues that are around the district as well. You know, I like it. You know, there's some people that are more lean to Washington and some people that lean more to their districts in terms of where you spend your time. I enjoy my area. So, you know, when the gavel strikes, I'm on my way home rather than spending the weekend there. So that obviously gives me the chance to get around the district. It's an interesting district. I think your listeners know, obviously, the Bedford area, Dartmouth area. However, you know, it goes all the way from Westport, southern part of Fall River. It's all the Cape and the Islands, and it goes up to Pembroke and Rockland, Norwell, all along the South Shore. So it takes a long time to get around. So when I have the opportunity to get around, I welcome it, you know, because it's a hard district to get around otherwise.
Well, when we're speaking with Congressman Keating, I want to ask you this question. We've been discussing foreign affairs, which is a big deal, obviously, for the country and in your wheelhouse. But locally, you just filed a bill that helps your constituents, although it's just outside of your constituents' area in Taunton, to try to resurrect, that's my word, not yours, the Native American casino in Taunton. Can you talk a little bit about that to us, Congressman?
Yeah, honestly, the casino is not the focus of what we did it, although it clearly is a part of it, but it's not why we did it at this juncture. What happened is we had some pretty good sourced information that the Interior was going to take an unprecedented action against the Wampanoag tribe, basically taking away something they had, taking away their land rights. And the result of that would have been pretty catastrophic financially. They would have back taxes all of a sudden that weren't owed otherwise. They wouldn't have land and wouldn't benefit from, as every other tribe has, of different social services and things that the U.S. government supports tribal nations with. And essentially without a land stake, they ceased to being a tribe. Now, this is the tribe that was the tribe of the first Thanksgiving. And so really my focus was to take a precautionary approach and have this legislation there in case the Interior took this extraordinary action and to maintain the status quo, really. So as much as people will focus on the casino part, that's not, I mean, that was ongoing before. What we put this in at this time for was because there was a fear that the Interior was going to take away what this tribe has right now, and that was a real concern. Essentially, in my view, existentially ending that tribe.
Yes, that's my understanding on it as well. And I wrote a piece about this for WBSM.com, and it's still up there. One thing I thought remarkable about the legislation is we hear about such grinding partisanship down there in Washington, but in fact about as many Democrats as many Republicans joined you as Democrats, including high-ranking members like Don Young of Alaska. Talk a little bit about that process, how you brought these gentlemen in.
Well, we work in coalitions, and that's what the legislative process is about. If you're going to be effective, you have to work together, not only across the aisle, but you have to work together with common interests. And the group that supported this was a group that was bipartisan, but was also a group that has an interest in a sensitivity towards tribal nations. Most of those people had different tribes in their state, in their districts, and we work together on those issues, as I do. So if there's issues that affect the sovereign tribes, given the history in our country, given kind of the harsh history of what's happened to them, and the fact that they're challenged in so many respects, social challenges. We work together as a group to support each other, and many voices are stronger that way. So when I said there was a threat to our tribe in terms of its very existence, these members signed on to help. Again, they were concerned about the existence of the tribe, not these other issues. Like they weren't concerned about casinos or the other issues. They joined me because of a concern of the very existence of that tribe.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Congressman, I appreciate you spending some time with us as you do every week here on WBSM. We'll be in touch next week, and have a wonderful weekend.
You too, Chris. Thank you, and let's enjoy the fact that we're not looking at a storm, I don't believe, this weekend.
I don't believe so either. When I got up this morning, the birds were chirping. I thought, this is beautiful. I can live with this.
We all can. Thanks.
Thanks, Congressman. That was Congressman William Keating. If you missed the interview, it will be up later today on WBSM.com. We'll be right back.